Well, hi everyone. We've made it to the end of our 15th the Ed Collab gathering. It's kind of amazing that we only had one major tech hiccup the whole day, and we managed to get through it. I think it's a testament to being educators. It's a testament to being educators that have, like Jessica, one of our tech leads, and I were talking about earlier, all of us have had to be our own production studio during this entire pandemic. So nothing can stop us now. But it's been an amazing day following along with your tweets, watching many of the sessions. I'm so glad that the Ed Collab has always had this format because I can go back and fully watch the sessions that I only dipped in and out of. It all in all was a great day. And so first, with some announcements before we go to our closing session here, a tremendously huge thank you to everyone who helped to make today possible. First, a thank you to Mike, who kicked us off with an incredibly inspiring, very thoughtful, opening session that pushed us, that helped us reflect, that just really kicked off our day in such a strong way. If you came in late to the day because of your time zone, or you didn't get a chance to see all of that session and all of the sessions are now available right on the same website. You can go back and watch them. So I encourage you to do that. And Mike's is certainly a session that you'll want to watch with your colleagues. So thank you to Mike for kicking us off this morning. Thank you to all of our presenters throughout the day. Give them another virtual yay. Please do use the hashtag, the Ed Collab Gathering, and tag any presenters that you loved learning from today. That feedback is so important and inspiring to everyone who presented because it helps them know what resonated with you. And please feel free to follow up with any of our presenters as well. On all of their session pages, you can find at least their Twitter handle, if not some more contact information as well. This day would not happen if not for our amazing tech team. These are all educators who provide tons and tons of volunteer hours to make sure that this day goes smoothly. They help to prep recordings and live sessions with presenters. They are a conduit of information for everyone who's a part of the day. If you would like to be a part of the tech team, we encourage you. Yes, please let us know, and I'll tell you how to do that in just a moment. But first, just a million cheers to Carolyn and Jessica, who continue to be our longtime co-leads of the gathering. Carolyn and Jessica, really, I don't know how we're so lucky to have crossed paths with you. You both, your grace under pressure, your incredibly hard and thoughtful work. Thank you for all that you do. Thanks to our tech team, Amy, Kristen, and Claire, who all have come back for another gathering. Thank you for all of your behind the scenes work. Thank you for checking in on the day as well today. I saw all of you tweeting across the day. Thank you for being a part of this. If you joined the day and you loved the day, any of you who were viewing or presenters as well too, please do go to the top of our website in the About section. There's a link that takes you to Tech Team. There you can find everyone's Twitter handles, and please do thank them for the amazing day that they helped put together. This gathering, like all gatherings, is completely free, no registration. You didn't have to fly here. You might even be in your pajamas right now. I may or may not. Half of me might be in pajamas. Half of me's in pajamas. Joggers. They're called joggers now. I'm in joggers, they're pajamas. So if you didn't have to come here, didn't have to pay registration, we do hope that you will pay that joy forward. All of our charities were adopted by our keynotes. Mike this morning talked about the Trevor Project and Camp 10 Trees. You can find out what he had to say about them, as well as more information and a direct link to their donation page right on our charities page. Thank you to those of you that tweeted about donating today. If you do, we'd love if you'd tag us and let us know that you donated, that you paid forward some of your joy from today. And then for our afternoon keynote, we've adopted Stop AAPI Hate. It's an organization made up of a number of groups housed with some university support. Stop AAPI Hate has 5 main pillars, which work to try to both gather and disseminate information about hate crimes and other issues affecting the Asian American and Pacific Islander community community. It also has 4 prongs, all built around providing support directly into communities in native languages, as well as providing support and allyship in policy levels and with others. It's an organization that's been working across the pandemic to make sure that the news and the media is aware of what's going on in these communities, and is also trying to provide ways that all of us can support and fight back against hate that's taking place. So as I said this morning, for everyone, for all the groups that are represented here, I borrowed some of Amber Ruffin's words. We love you. What's happening to you is not right. It's not okay. You deserve to feel safe. You deserve to feel loved. And we're here with you and for you. And the best way that we can do that is to support organizations that are on the ground doing the work, as well as to what you heard across sessions today, to learn and grow in your own practice and allyship or membership, depending on where your identity lies. Before we move to our closing, just a few big announcements. And we'd love if you'd share the word about these too. So announcement number 1. Because of the COVID pandemic, we extended our associates program an additional year. So associates that were associate members 2 years ago, not this school year, the school year before, just extended into this second school year. And what we found is that 2 years is really nice. 2 years is a nice amount of time to get to know each other, to not feel like we just met you and now you're gone. It's a way that it's something that we felt right in our community. It happened because of the pandemic, but it turned out to be a good solution. So we are happy to announce that the associate program will continue, and beginning right now, right this second, we are accepting applications to join our next 2-year cohort. The associate program is kind of like an internship, sort of. It's the way that some associate members have described it is it's like really amazing free PD. I think Lisa Stone even said, I feel like I should be paying you for this. And I was like, don't say that so loud, Lisa. Don't give us any ideas. No. The associate program are educators, just like you, who apply to join a 2-year membership in our think tank. Our think tank meets at least once a month. Sometimes we have some little side projects that we take up as well too. And we teach each other. So we come together as a collaborative each month. We come together and a few people volunteer to teach something to the rest of us. It's a place that we learn and grow. Members of the associate group also can present your guaranteed acceptance in the gathering. You can write blogs for our blog posts, for our blog, the community blog. There's lots of other ways that you're connected to the community. And so you can find out a lot more information about the associates program if you follow that link, or if you go on our main website, you can read a lot more there, expectations, commitments, ways that the program works, and how to apply. I should have put on here, we're accepting applications through some point soon. I want to say it's like end of May. Maybe it's that. Pretend it's end of May, and if it's June, you just won some extra time, but we'd love to have you apply. If you know amazing, inspiring educators that you think would love this program, please send the link to them and the information as well, and we will be sharing a lot more about that over our social media as well too. That's big announcement number 1. Big announcement number 2, our study series. Also, because of the pandemic, things were a lot slower than they normally would be, and that's all right by us. But now things are together. So right this second, you can go to learning.theeducatorcollaborative.com, and you can pay whatever you would like to join our study series. The study series this year, we tried to make it pandemic Zoom fatigue friendly, are all, and I have the website right here, are across a variety of topics: planning, organizing, assessing, methods, tools, and Lamar will be adding an Ending the Year with Joy session very soon. They're by EdCollab members. You can see, if you loved hearing from Carla today, she's led some sessions. Dr. Tawanda Harris leads some. Elizabeth, who will be presenting on our closing shortly, is there. Julia Torres, Troy Hicks, Dr. Tracy Flores. EdCollab folks that you know and love have presented these 30-minute super hyper practical sessions. So all of them are kind of following a similar format, intended to show you an issue, some tips for solving it, and what you can do to support your teaching and learning in this environment we're in right now. If you just click that big pay what you're able link, You can literally pay whatever you're able. We would love if you'd support us and our presenters in some way. But last year when we started Pay What You're Able, a whole bunch of you joined for free, and that's great too. We hope that if you join in any way, you will share out the learning that you have. You'll encourage others to join as well too. What matters most to us is that we are a collective of educators working to continue to grow the ways that literacy is practiced in schools and across communities. So we hope you'll join us with that. You can register right now. And then the Ed Collab, we also provide support to schools, all of us, in many different ways. The Gathering, ways that we support each other in our think tank. And then we also provide professional development to schools in many different ways. So if you're interested in having some of us from the Ed Collab, maybe someone that you saw today, joining you and your school at the end of this year, across the summer, or maybe even into next year, you can find information there on our website. And there's ways that you can connect with us there. And we're happy to talk to anyone that might want to invite us to work with you virtually. And then maybe someday, when we're all vaccinated, in person again, I hope. All right, now the biggest announcement of all, our next gathering. So we love to end each gathering day by letting you know when the next one happens and announcing our keynote. So I could not be more delighted. And there's a clue over here. Well, it can't be Christina because we already saw Christina before. And ooh, there's also a bunch of folks here that I would love for us to join, but perhaps you've seen this new book that's out. That's right, the amazing Henna Khan will be our keynote for our fall Ed Collab gathering. Henna will be here with us on September 18th. So mark your calendar right now, September 18th, 2021, Henna Khan, the author of tons of amazing books, picture books. She's a part of multiple anthologies, has a lot of books for middle grades, including the amazing, wonderful Amina series. So I have, oh no, I have it in the other room. Amina's voice, I swear I take everywhere. Well, now it's all virtual, but when I used to travel a lot, I took everywhere. It was a text that I loved to do read alouds from. It's a text that I love to model think alouds and use as mentor text. And just out, fresh off the presses, is the follow-up to Amina's voice. If you know that incredible text, you will love Amina's song. And so we're so delighted and grateful and thankful that Henna Khan will be joining us. If you wouldn't mind, give her a shout out and let her know how excited you are to see her on the 18th by using her Twitter handle @HennaKhanBooks. Now, the gathering is only the gathering if you're with us. So proposals are open right now. If you're on our site and you go up to the menu, there's a big old link that says proposals. Click it. When you follow that, there you'll be able to choose if you'd like to apply to the tech team, and or if you'd like to submit a proposal for our September 18th, the Ed Collab gathering. You could present just like today. We are assuming that some of the sessions will be pre-recorded, and we're hoping to maybe have a few that are live, a few more, if things feel a little better into the fall, but we'll see. We're going to have proposals open through June 13th, though. Don't wait, because I'm someone who waits and then I procrastinate and then sometimes I forget. So if you're inspired by today, think really soon about who you might want to present with, and we invite you to submit a proposal. So mark your calendar, September 18th. It's going to be awesome, and we hope that you're part of it too. Okay, so without further ado, that brings us over to our closing keynote. So I'd love to have, and they're going to join me here on camera in just a second, two colleagues here at the Ed Collab who are members of our think tank, who are two educators that I learn a ton with and from, Dr. Carrie Orange-Jones and Elizabeth Lacey Schoenberger. They are people who are deeply rooted in thoughtful pedagogy and responsive pedagogy, and I could not be more delighted than to present this closing with you. And so I'm going to stop sharing this screen so I can share another one. And Carrie and Elizabeth, you can pop on camera. There you are. Hi. And I will in a very smooth way, just I was so smooth until this second, just adjust my screen share. Whoop, and now we're ready. Okay, so I'll have you introduce yourselves in just a minute. Before you do that, we wanted to give a thank you to, oop, there we go. A thank you to the current Voices in the Middle editors. So thank you, Sarah Cater. Thank you, Shelby Whitty. Sarah and Shelby are just about to finish their term as editors of NCTE's Voices in the Middle journal. They've worked really hard to make this a journal that is a voice of and for practicing educators, that's peer reviewed and thoughtful as it always has been, but to really feel like it's talking in a very practical, direct way to the work that you do in your schools. And so they are going to have their very last issue of their tenure next month, May 1st, and they invited us to submit an article. And so if it wasn't for them, this session may not be happening. It's a topic that we have talked about and thought together, the group of us here, and we've talked and thought about at the Ed Collab as well. But we just want to say thank you to them for inviting us into this. So before we jump in, I'd love to have Carrie and then Elizabeth to just introduce yourself. Where are you? What do you do? And then we'll jump into our session.
Okay, hi, good afternoon. I'm Dr. Carrie Orange Jones. I am a 5th grade science and social studies teacher in West Orange, New Jersey, and I teach a course at William Patterson and CUNY, and I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with you all about learning loss and deficit thinking with Chris and Elizabeth.
I'm Elizabeth Lacey Schoenberger. I've worn a lot of hats over my years, teacher, professor, administrator, literacy coach, but I'm currently so proud to just say that I am a pandemic mom currently and a pandemic classroom teacher in 8th grade literacy. So I also am just really appreciative to have another chance to nerd out with these two wonderful people and talk about things we're passionate about.
Thank you. See that? I mean, you likely already know them, but this is why I really love working with both of you. All right, so learning loss. So everywhere you've looked and everywhere you've heard, everyone's talking about learning loss. Before the pandemic even really took off, just as it was starting, literally a week or two in, newspapers were already running stories about the lost year, about learning loss, about how will we ever make this year up again. From the very start, there was already talk from politicians about how there's so much work that we have to do. And this session is building on our article. So if you'd like to know even more about some of what we're talking about here, go to NCT's Voices in the Middle. You should subscribe to it anyway, but we'll be in the May 1st issue. But building on that article, this session is intended to say a little bit about the dangers of using that language. And then we're going to provide some ideas about assessment and curriculum that can help you work against it. Our two big themes across this afternoon are humanity and complexity. Our argument is that the term learning loss and the ideology that comes around it erases the humanity of individuals. It takes away the individual quirks and joys and loves of our kids. It erases the humanities of educators who've given their blood, sweat, and tears during this impossible time in all of our lives. It takes away the ability to see people as people. It also erases complexity. It broad brushes and says that everyone's gone through the same exact experience in the same exact way, and all it is negative. And so we're going to have a few sections here. I'm going to start by helping you think about the language of learning loss and some ways to challenge that. Then Carrie's going to help you think about assessment, and then Elizabeth will take us to some curriculum ideas that will help us work against some of the ideologies behind it. So first of all, learning loss, let's just say it, is inaccurate and dangerous. It's a term that causes harm. And one thing we want to say up front is, yeah, maybe some kids lost some learning or things didn't go so well for them this year. We're not saying that didn't happen. But we're also saying that things went really well for some kids too, and some stuff was kind of in the middle. We're also not saying that you as an individual person, if you're using that term, you're necessarily trying to use it in a really negative or bad way. But what we are saying is this: systems harm people. Systems are the things that cause negative effects on children. Systems are the things that change the way that kids perceive themselves or the ways that they move through school. And so when individuals are part of a system, when you add to it instead of fighting against it, you're aiding that system and causing more harm. We measure what we look for. one example of that is Gloria Lansing Billings. Years ago, she argued against, among a group of mostly researchers of color, argued against the terminology achievement gap. She said the term achievement gap makes us believe that, number one, there's the static gap between races in particular, and class issue as well, that there's this kind of static way that things work. And so there's always this hole that's there. Achievement gap also places the problem on students. She said a better language, something that we should use instead, is to call it an educational debt. By calling it an educational debt, it forces us to think, well, what are the things that we as adults and we as a system have not given and have kind of fallen into the red with certain communities and groups. In the United States, it's often children living in poverty or in major cities, and those tend to be children of color overwhelmingly. And so what have we done to not fill the debt that our society has created? Achievement gap makes us think that there are some kids who have to slow down for others to catch up, and they never ever will, or that there's this broad brush idea of everyone is kind of in the same boat, that if you are a Black student in New York City, you must be a poor performer. And she argued against that. So what we'd like to suggest is some advice from Paul Gorski. Paul Gorski suggests that one thing we have to do in order to change systems is to be hyper aware when there is oppressive or deficit language that removes people's humanity and changes the sorts of complexity that we look through. And so we're going to use that to just think about this term, learning loss. So one thing that Paul says is we have to look for language that places an issue on the people experiencing the issue. So if we define an issue by the people who are experiencing it, it's this small little cycle of, well, it's your problem, it's your problem, it's your problem. So just like achievement gap says, well, it's some issue that kids have, but educational debt makes us think about everyone around us, we'd argue that learning loss places the problem at the feet of kids, because who's doing the learning? Children. So learning loss means that children own the problem. It's their learning that was lost. It also is 1,000% deficit. Labeling it learning loss automatically sends us in with a vision to try to find things that are bad. If I tell you right now, actually really try this, look around the space that you're in and look for everything that's the color blue. Do it. If you look for things that are color blue, everything that's blue will pop out to you. That candle, these little lights on here, over there I can see the pillow. It's kind of blue-green, but that plate over there. You will look for and measure the things that you're trained on. And so if we go into this post-pandemic time, whenever it comes, looking for learning loss, we are looking for a deficit and we're blaming kids for it. The way to fight against that is, number one, to notice it, and then number two, to pay attention to language that instead places issues in systems. So don't place language on people, because that leads to not just words, but ideologies too. Instead, place them in systems. So here are some samples. You might say things like assessment limitations and revisions, curriculum gaps and opportunities. Now, we use the word gaps there, and we had some debate about it. But one thing that I think we came to was that even curriculum gaps and opportunities is placing an issue in a system. What are the limitations or revisions that we need around our assessment system? What are the gaps or opportunities in our curriculum that we can work to fill or shore up, or maybe ones that we've discovered? And on purpose, both of those have two sides of a balance. What's not going well and what could go better, or what did we learn from this that's gone better? And then we even threw in teaching discoveries. Imagine going into a planning session with colleagues where you're looking for examples of learning loss and how to fill them in, versus going into a session planning with colleagues to consider, well, what discoveries did we make during the pandemic? What kids did we find that were excelling? And one thing to say, and Carrie's going to pick up on this point next, is that not everyone experienced negative stuff during this pandemic. There are so many children that this difference in the way that they were presented information, the kind of like space that they had to think and move, oftentimes even within their own place where they lived, for some kids made this an even better experience than they've had before. This is true for some teachers as well, too. So when we think about language, the first thing we have to do to disrupt what we know can be dangerous going into this post-pandemic time is looking for language, whether it's inside of agendas, conversations, initiatives that place problems within children, and we can work to fix and replace that language with ones that place it in systems. So Carrie, I'll pass it over to you.
Okay, hi everyone. So I'm going to talk about assessment. Assessment is something of a passion of mine. I try to diversify it because when we become teachers, we talk about differentiation of instruction and how do we differentiate instruction and not speak to assessment. And all children are different, and thus, if they're learning differently, then they should be assessed appropriately. And so when we talk about deficit language and we talk about this post-pandemic, what's going to happen next in assessment, like Chris said, there's this assumption that there's loss. And let's talk about what students have gained. So let's look at let's weigh the negative versus the positive. Instead of saying that there's loss, let's focus more on what they have gained. There's the academic versus the personal. What's more important? And right now, in my opinion, what's significant is taking into consideration students' feelings about assessment. Because once we start talking about learning loss, then the students start to feel like, oh, I'm, not good enough, or I'm not substandard. Even this week, I had a conversation with students about sixth grade, and one of the students said to me in a private chat, Dr. Jones, are we ready for sixth grade? And I'm like, everyone is ready for the next phase in their life. It just depends on how you implement this. I don't want anyone to think that they're not ready. So let's not talk about what you don't know. Let's talk about what you do know. And I think that is way more important for children, because they do internalize this language when they hear learning loss, or see it on the news, or when your president gets on TV and talk about learning loss and learning gaps. And not only do students internalize this, but we are talking about teacher efficacy as well. And, teachers have worked so hard and so diligently during this pandemic to ensure that students get a proper education, and they compacted the curriculum. And I know Elizabeth is going to talk about curriculum, but if it's compacted, if the children didn't learn it, then there's no loss. And we just simply need to reactivate student knowledge. And students do know what they've learned. They do understand what they've learned. I've asked students on a Jamboard a few weeks ago, and Chris and Elizabeth and I started talking about this idea of learning loss. What is it that you've learned? And they were able to recall not just the academic part. Some students talked about Native American history. Some students talked about being able to write a nonfiction story. But some students said things like, I learned that it was important to be a believer, and that one day we will go to school. And I learned that you have to be brave when the COVID came. So this is a different type of assessment. It's not the bubble type of assessment, but you want to also assess their SEL. Where are they in terms of, their social and emotional? And so if we're going to assess them, we want to be humane and compassionate. That's our, cross line for all three of us, maintaining humanity and being compassionate with the language we use, how we assess them, how we plan curriculum. We want to make sure that we address these needs. And I want to speak about, I have a quote real fast that Dr. Mitchell Robinson, who is a professor at the University of Michigan, said, to be clear, what we've lost over the past year has not been learning. We've lost relationships with our family members, our friends, and our students. Anyone who's focused on learning loss right now is no one we need to listen to. We've lost a year of human relationships, and that is worth mourning. We can catch up on learning stuff, but that year of relationship building is gone forever. And so to focus on let's assess when we go back to school, whether it's this spring, we're going to see students again in person soon in my district, or whether it's in September. Let's not focus on these bubble tests and these standardized tests. How can we assess students at where they are and make it more humane and compassionate? I'm going to go to the next slide, please. So, and we talk about assessment. So let's talk about this language thing again. Instead of saying assess, how do we access? How do we access student knowledge? So let's re-examine what assessment is, because we are used to the bubble tests. We're used to quizzes and things of that. Why don't we measure or determine readiness or skill acquisition? Let's use that language. And what's a non-traditional way of doing it? So when we talk about assessment, and like I said, Elizabeth's going to talk about curriculum. When we talk about that, why do we constantly have to fall prey to standardized tests? Why can't we come up with different alternatives to gauge student knowledge? Discussion prompts, a lot of information comes out from children who are brutally honest, and I appreciate that because it makes the teaching more fun. But they can tell you what they learned. They can verbalize it in the discussion. Art and sketchnoting. My colleague, Amy Pacifico, is big on sketchnoting when she does read alouds. And you can look at the sketches and see what the students have learned. I'm big on project-based learning. I've done Jamestown for the last few years. And when we get finished with Jamestown, the students have a project that they do where they do like a historical fiction or a simulation. And that's their assessment, or that's how I access their learning. And I had one student do a graphic novel. I had another student do a book. She used Book Creator to create a book. I had another student create a poster. That's assessment. I've had one student actually do a recording on Flipgrid. That's assessment. Asking questions, playing games. These things speak to the student's strengths. And sometimes students, when we talk about being humane and compassionate, students have test stress. They know when they sit down at a computer to do a computerized test, or like MAP, or whatever we used to do, that we call in New Jersey the NJSLA. But whatever it is, the standardized testing is that students have to do across the country. When they sit in front of a computer, they understand that this is time for them to really sit down and we need to take this test. And they are so focused on, am I doing a good job, Dr. Jones? And I've heard kids say that to me, and they get like anxious. And when we're talking about trauma-induced teaching and learning right now, well, then we don't want trauma-induced testing either. And what are we assessing anyway? Let's talk about the things that the kids gained instead of the loss. And while we might say, oh, there's learning loss, how about the fact that although we were quarantined, and some people might say they were stuck in the house, kids gained a lot of time with their families in a way that was different than normal. Instead of like the Saturday, what are we going to do this weekend? There's quality time that was gained. And a lot of parents actually had to stay home with their students, their children, and help us, the educators, with their learning. So that's not a loss, that's a gain. So I want to go and show you some examples of some assessment that we've done. So like I said, we've done drawings. On the right side, you see is a podcast. They did the global goals. So, once they learned about the global goals and connected it to this book that we were reading, A Bridge Home, and talked about geography and in the country of India and looking at different components of the sociology in India, they've created a podcast. That's assessment. Presentations, discussions, and interviews. We've had students do interviews. Google Suites tools, and I'm going to show you some of that stuff on the next slide. Book creation programs, Flipgrid, Seesaw. Here's an example of a poster. When the kids come into the classroom in September, do we necessarily have to sit them down in front of a computer to assess what they've gained? We don't want to say lost, we want to say gained. We can use all these different types of tools. But on the next slide, this is something that's really one of my favorites. So my colleague Amy, and I've done it before too, Amy always does check-ins with students. This is really a great way when the kids come in September to access their learning. Amy does this often. I've done it as an exit ticket. She uses Google Form. How did the first week go? This was back in September. And I thought, wow, this is amazing, because now we were in a different learning situation in my district. We started off with virtual. So how did the first week go? What did you like about this week? That's assessment. We can use these types of tools to gauge learning. Like, what is it that you remember from last year? What is a lesson that you thought stood out the most from last year? What is something that you think is really important that you learned last year? Let's get to know the kids socially and emotionally before we delve into this whole idea of assessment. Let's find creative ways to gauge their learning without giving them anxiety, without the students coming in and thinking, that they're falling short. And that was an article by Gerwitz in 2020, especially when they don't perform as expected, because of course they always find out. They want to know, how did I do? What's my grade? And if it's not something that, kids understand A, B, C, D, 4, 3, 2, 1, they understand that. Do we want students to start a new year in September after coming off of the pandemic with this anxiety of, not feeling good enough or feeling like they're unprepared? There are certain ways that we can, I don't want to say trick them into letting us know where they are. This Google form is one of the strongest examples. And Chris is going to jump in here just a second because he has something that he wants to add. But, what do you still need help with? Which is another. Some students said nothing. Some students said social studies. Some said tech stuff. But the kids can verbalize to you not only what they've gained, but where they want assistance. I don't want to say help because that makes it sound like weakness. But where do they need assistance at? And children can verbalize these things to you. So now our job, although while it might be a lot of work for us, but if we want to assess humanely, then we'll take the time to make that happen. Chris, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that one thing I'm always so taken by, and I find myself challenged by with your work around assessment, is how you're using project-based learning, or maybe not even a full project-based, but just like projects or work, or even like you said, like small things that kids do as your lens for their assessment. So it challenges me, because I often think about that, like, okay, well, yeah, we need to do like a diagnostic of some kind. Don't we do that? And then everyone's sitting down in a certain kind of a way. But really looking at the small work that they do and the larger work, that it's your lens. I feel like I learned this constantly from you. It's your lens as a teacher and how you look at their work that gives you the assessment data you need. So it's not like, if any of you don't already do something like this, it's not like you have to think, okay, well, instead of doing that running record assessment, what could I make them do? No, just have them do the things that they do.
Right.
It's your lens that changes.
Right. And if I'm being really brutally honest, as I'm going to be selfish a little bit, assessment for me, I love to read and I love to write. I write a lot, but not everyone is a writer. And honestly, if you are a person who loves language and you like to read and you like literature and you like to write, and you have somebody who's not a strong writer, you kind of don't want to read, out of 60 kids, 10 of them, and that's just not their strength. However, they can draw. Or I had one student who was very gifted, tactile giftedness, and he could explain it verbally via Flipgrid. So for me, assessment and diversification of it is not even just about the kids, but if I'm being really honest and being a little selfish, I want to see something different. I don't want to sit and read the same things over and over and over again.
That's also so funny.
Right, and talk about differentiation.
It's so real though.
Differentiate. So we're going to differentiate instruction, but not assessment. We're not going to speak to the student's strengths. More importantly, right now in this current climate, that's what we need to do. We need to speak to their strengths, and we need to give them the asset-based language and asset-based assessments as opposed to that deficit thinking. So with that, Elizabeth is going to start talking about curriculum. How do we plan this too and make it happen so that we're asset-based and not deficit-based?
Thank you so much. And I love that you said that out loud. while we're being recorded, like the bravery of being like, I don't want to read 60 essays because we all know it's true. So I really appreciate that. And it, you know, I like that we're really owning up to this too, right? It's about us as educators. We are human too, right? So when we talk about this idea of humanity, that goes for us as educators as well. I know a lot of you out there are sitting there saying, all of this is lovely, but really, like, what do we do? Like, what are we going to do with this next year, right? There's this looming, we've got to do something. We've got to do something different. We've got to do something more. We've got to, like, what are we going to do? So I'm going to offer up an incredibly radical and innovative piece of advice or opinion, which is that what I think we should do is continue doing what we as really good educators do, which is we teach the kids in front of us. We figure out what their strengths and their weaknesses are, and we build on their strengths and we scaffold for their weaknesses. This is what we always do. In a non-pandemic year, I have somewhere between 75 and 100 eighth graders walk in my door. And within that, I have at least 10 different levels of readiness when it comes to things like language acquisition and reading skills.
Amen.
Right. So while I feel like what's been happening with all this discussion around the pandemic and all of that is that more of the world seems very aware of this, but we're going to do what good educators do. Maybe probably with a greater sense of urgency than ever before, but we're going to do what we know to do. So the first thing that I would say is a lot of this is like, but what are we going to do when they walk in the door next year? And as Carrie already said, and I'm going to echo, we're going to build in opportunities for success. I am begging you to not have children who walk through the door already carrying the weight of their world on their shoulders. If the first thing we do is sit them down in front of a computer screen and ask them to take a diagnostic, we're reinforcing for them that we don't think they're ready to be here. And we need to find all their problems so that we can hurry and fix them. I've had several students tell me this recently. I teach eighth grade, they're getting ready to go on to high school. And I have students say, like, I can't sign up for this AP class, or I can't sign up for this honors class. I'm not ready. I didn't learn enough. And I keep telling them, you're going to be fine. You are ready. But so when our students walk in the door next year, we need to figure out ways to build in authentic success quickly. And I say authentic because what we don't want is like, here's a certificate, you brought your pencil. We want to do things like reread one of your favorite books from a previous grade so that you read a book quickly and can talk about it. We want to do things like have them design a present and future self resume so we can learn about their skills and their dreams. We can design a class blog site and have every student write an opinion about anything they want, anything that makes them feel valued and seen, and more importantly, successful, that they belong in your classroom with you, and they are ready to go with you on this journey through this year. So the first thing I would say is, if you're looking to tweak anything about your curriculum, start by looking at your opening weeks. And if they're filled with days worth of diagnostics, let's assess that and perhaps let's assess that assessment and perhaps move to something different. The next thing I would say, and again, this is something that as good educators should always do, but it's going to be especially important this next year, is to build in wiggle room to all of your units. With the best of intentions, when we start to plan out our units, we want to cram in as many things as possible because we need to teach all the things. And then what happens is we're going with that breadth over depth, right? So we touch on everything and then stressfully move forward at a breakneck pace, and you know, it's not really getting to that depth of knowledge that we want to do. So we want to build in this wiggle room so that we have space, the beginning, middle, and end of each unit, to really try to activate prior knowledge, to really try to open up for small groups and scaffolds if needed, and to build out extensions if they're ready for it. So this is something that we want to just think through and do. So I have a couple of examples of what this means and what this could look like. The first is in terms of across the days of a unit. So this is obviously overly simplistic, but just for the sake of thinking about it, let's say we're trying to plan out a 30-day unit. Within those 30 days, we would want to reserve the first couple of days Again, just to activate what they already know about what we're heading into, to lead them through an inquiry study, to get them more involved in it, to immerse them in whatever the genre is. Then obviously we want to plan out several days worth of our teaching points. But then we're going to leave some open spots. We're going to leave a couple of days there in the middle. One of my colleagues used to call this mix up, fix up time. And it was like, this is the opportunity to really take a look at teaching points you weren't planning on teaching, but you've now come to realize your students really need, or to break students out into groups and sort of push different levels based on where they're at, right? But we want to leave some open space in our unit for that. And if we pilled out all days and say we have to teach everything, then we won't have that breathing space that we need. Then you're going to go back into your teaching objectives that you have planned. But then again, before we hit that end of unit, we're going to leave some open days. And this might be a point where some of your kids are actually ready for extensions. Like they're done with whatever it is you wanted them to do in this unit, and they're ready for more. And for other kids, it's like, oh, they are not at that finish line. Let's give them some scaffolds and some things to get them there, right? But again, we're going to leave that open space. And before we get to our presentations, celebrations, and reflections, what we don't want to do is wait until the last day of the unit and have them reflect on all the things they didn't do well because we didn't help them do it well. And so we want to build in that time ahead of those reflection days to do our best to get more of them across that finish line and where we want them to go. So that's one way that you can build in that wiggle room in that space. Another way you can think about it is across the course of your week, building in some wiggle room days or some wiggle room breathing time to sort of think through the different ways that things could go. So what this can look like, and again, this is just a sample, sort of very simplistic way of viewing it, right? But it might look like, okay, on Monday, I'm going to teach a writing mini lesson. On Tuesday, I'm going to teach nothing new. I'm just going to remind them that this is what we're doing. And I'm going to have them start thinking through it as they move across. And I'm going to get them started on working. And what I'm going to do on that day is I'm going to creepily peek over their shoulders and with my notepad, and I'm going to be noticing things like patterns. What are some things I'm seeing that groups of students need or that groups of students are ready for? So that then for Wednesday and Thursday, instead of my mini lessons on those days, it's going to look like small groups or stations or conferences based on what I'm seeing with the work in my room. And then Friday, we're going to pick back up and start in on a new mini lesson so that across the flow or the course of a week, I have 2 days where I'm teaching whole class teaching objectives. I have 1 day where I'm not teaching anything new. I'm just giving the students space to work and giving myself space to really learn about what they're doing. Again, I teach middle school. I have 100 kids, right? I'm leaving myself class time to do it every week so that I can actually do it rather than try to look at 100 notebooks frantically at 7 or 8 o'clock at night. So building in across the course of your week some breathing room time. It's good for the kids because they have time in their week where they are just owning their own learning and working, and you have time to really look at how you're doing and how they're doing and adjust things accordingly. So there's some thoughts around like how you can proceed. If we think about, okay, great, we've built in some wiggle room, we've shifted our thinking, but still, we're still worried, right? We think our kids haven't learned things. We're still really worried. Fair. Remember, it's not a learning gap, but it might be that you have some curriculum or standards gaps that need addressing. Now, we're hearing a lot of buzz around the world wanting to build in all new units. We're calling them bridge units. We're calling it unit 0. We're calling it like 0.5, as in like I have to teach a 5.5 unit before I can start my 6th grade unit, right? There might be a place for that. For example, if 5th grade math didn't make it to their fractions unit, it might be true that 6th grade math wants to really teach into that fraction unit before moving ahead with 6th grade math. But our blessing in the English language arts area is that there's very few things that are so radically new and different each year that the students can't proceed without them. So for us in English, it might look a lot more like tweaking rather than complete rewriting. And it's going to require that you and your teams and your schools really start asking some important questions, right? So some of the questions you might want to think about is to ask yourself, was it a brand new skill or standard that got passed over the year before? Or was it a spiral review standard that you can just build on, right? So when you ask yourself that, that'll help you determine which path you need to go down. If it was a brand new thing that they didn't see, and they didn't see the year before, and they didn't see the year before that, then yes, we need to build that into one of our already existing units as we move forward. If it was a spiral review standard that they didn't get to, then we might want to build in some prior knowledge activation or something like that, but we can pick up where they left off and keep going within it. So I'm going to show you a quick example of what I mean by sort of analyzing for that. Let's say, for example, I teach 7th grade and I want to pick up with where they're at in terms of research, but I know they didn't get to their research unit this year in 6th grade. It's all going to be okay, but I want to go through the standards from 5th grade and 6th grade and 7th grade and ask myself, if they didn't get the research unit in 6th grade, what does that mean they missed that I might need to pick up on in 7th grade? So as you can see, for the first time in 6th grade, they're asked to assess the credibility of a source. That's new. And if they didn't get it in 6th grade, that's something that I need to build out a little bit more in 7th grade, because I'm no longer teaching a group of students where I assume they've seen it before. I'm now teaching a group of students that haven't heard about this before. And so I'm going to need to build in more time to cover it. Doesn't mean I need a whole new unit. It just means within my research unit, I might need a few additional days to go in and teach into some of these things like credibility, how to quote, how to build a bibliography, things like that, because they haven't seen them before. So these are the conversations you might want to be having, is sort of examining some of those ideas. You also though want to look ahead to what are the opportunities. So in addition to the gaps, what are some things that your teachers took on this year that were new and exciting and engaging to kids, and how can we capitalize on those moving forward? What was super essential, and even more important, what was not essential? Like maybe we could do without some of those things. We didn't do them this year and all the kids are doing okay. Maybe 5 benchmarks is 5 too many. So we might want to think through some of that, right? How could we not bring back some of the things that we cut? And then as long as you're really highlighting and thinking about your curriculum and tweaking some things, what were some voices that you noticed or some experience that you noticed? We've lived inside of our children's worlds in a different way this year. We go in through their Zoom screens and their worlds. What are some of the experiences and voices that we want to capture differently moving forward? And how can we bring that into our planning and into our curriculum work as we move ahead? So hopefully thinking through some of these things, hopefully it's a bit of a deep breath, right? Like we are encouraging that we continue doing what we're doing, maybe with a renewed sense of urgency and maybe with a heightened lens towards the opportunities we can build on and the small tweaks that we can make. But most importantly, just recognizing who each of our individual students are, which again is something that we always do. So I'm going to turn it back over. I think I'm tossing the baton back to Chris, but I'll turn it back over from there. And we love to hear out and talk more about this moving forward.
Yes, so I appreciate many things. And one is really that point of, so if you're used to already doing responsive instruction, if that's the heart and soul of the work that you do, then that's the thing to keep holding on to, because that's what's going to help you and your kids. And what we were doing while all of you were watching is we were able to talk to each other in the chat box. And so both Gary and I were responding to that, like having those breaks in the unit, in the midst of the unit, right? Like I think that so often there's this push, and we're inventors. As educators, we're inventors. So when this pandemic happened, we're trying to invent the best that we can. So there's no knock on anyone. But I think we're all trying to figure out that, like you said, the like 0.5 unit and the 0 unit and the like, I'm going to take a week in between a mini unit. Those are happening almost like they're this brand new thing sandwiched in between everything else. What I love about this structure is be inside of something you're already planning to do. Just make extra space to be especially responsive. And in that especially responsive time, you have no plan other than watching your kids really carefully and doing something about it, helping them in small groups or conferences. That just feels so powerful. We just want to end by just saying it's on us to make these changes. In some research on kind of levers for teacher change, John Diamond and colleagues talk about how there's one perception that if there's big policy changes and you attach carrot and stick to them, so like standardized tests that call you a bad teacher and call your school bad, or that reward you for being an excellent teacher, and it's so mired in racism and classism anyway, that carrot and stick idea is one thought about how policy changes, or that you have to have like a centralized vision that you then push down to everyone else. And what a lot of their research has come to is that really the greatest change, the greatest impact on classroom practice is the small teacher teams. It's the teams of teachers that plan together, either because you're assigned to, you're in a PLN, you're on a grade team, or you just are people that are across grades, but you just like to plan together anyway. The small teacher teams have the greatest impact on what happens in the classroom, because let's face it, all of us are also folks that know how to like close your door and do your own thing, which, you know, there's plus and minus to that. But it's the closest to the classroom that has the greatest impact on the classroom. So first and foremost, know and believe and hold into your heart the first thing we started with, that this language is inaccurate and it's dangerous. We know that kids, especially minoritized children, either because of their race, gender, sexuality, or whatever that group in your school is that seem to be kind of pushed from the others, we know that especially minoritized children tend to have the highest amount of IEP referrals, tend to have the most didactic curriculum, tend to have the largest amount of adult hands trying to help them by also telling them what to do. They have the most amount of adult agendas to navigate. And so when you think about this sort of language creeping into your own district, you have to say something or do something, whether it's really public or it's just quiet amongst your team, because it can directly change the way that kids are treated in your school and their own access and experience in education. You have the power to do it, though. The closer you are to instruction, the more you can say, okay, that's nice that you want us to talk about learning loss. Hey, my grade level team, could we first talk about what did you discover about kids in your teaching this year, and start there. And then Carrie, you had some ways that we can think about language.
Yeah, I said, we want to be change agents. We want to adapt and adopt asset-based language. Encourage others to stop using deficit-based language and statements. For example, instead of saying standards, goals. And another word that came up last night when we were meeting, pursuits. Access and assess. Instead of saying we're assessing students, how are we accessing what they've learned? And that's way more positive use of language. And learning loss versus learning gains. Let's not focus on what they quote unquote lost, but let's talk about the gains. When we talk about gains, it makes the students feel like, empowered. And it's also good language for teachers as well, because, when we talk about teacher efficacy, which is something that I did my dissertation on, and I'm really ingrained in that, when we start to internalize that whole idea of, loss, and then we feel ineffectual. So it's not just good for the students, but it's good for all of us, emotionally and holistically, to change our mindset about using deficit-based language and moving towards more asset-based language.
So we, first of all, invite you, May 1st is when the NCTE Voices from the Middle journal article comes out. And so we invite you, if you're not already a subscriber, consider subscribing. I think it's really cheap. I don't want to say what it is, but it's barely anything to have an amazing journal. And the incoming editors are also really awesome. Hi. So you could check out the article there. You'll find it through the NCT website, Voices in the Middle. Carrie has an excellent blog that's up on our community blog about thinking about assessment and about a child who challenged her in that. So you can learn more that way. And then we, of course, invite you to connect with us so you can talk to us. Oh, no, we don't have it on this slide. Look on the page. You can talk to us on Twitter. You can use the hashtag #TheEdClubGathering. And if you'd like to invite any of my amazing colleagues here to come work with you at your school, you can also connect with us that way too. So just want to first say thank you to Elizabeth and Carrie for sharing your expertise this afternoon. Thank you so much. And thanks one final time to all of you. Thank you for being a part of today. If you are anywhere in the world, let's see who's been joining us. US, Mexico, UK, Austria, Australia, Saudi Arabia, some I didn't mention this morning, Switzerland, Ukraine, Cambodia, Mongolia, Taiwan, Italy, Argentina, Latvia. Hi to all of you, and there's many others. Hi from all over the world. Thank you for joining us today. If any point of this conference was inspiring to you, please do click on that little link that says charity, so you can pay the joy forward. We also invite you to submit a proposal. You could present during this incredible day, just like all the amazing people you saw, or you could join the tech team, or both. Sometimes people do both. So thank you, Elizabeth, Carrie, for doing this with me. Thank you, everyone, for making today amazing. Have a great rest of your weekend, and we hope to see you again in the fall. We'll see you at September 18th with HennaCon. Bye, everyone.